There's a saying that I'm always reminded of, and it goes like this: hurt people hurt people, hurt people hurt people. And it's a cycle that keeps going on and on. The man who brought the deepest pain into my childhood was my biological father. And I often stop and think about who hurt him, because he didn't bring hurt into my life just out of nowhere. No man, I think, has a child and says, I want to hurt this child. But because he had been hurt, because he had been scarred and wounded and never really learned how to deal with his wounds and his pain and reconcile that, give it to God, he never found healing. And therefore, he repeated a cycle of hurt. Well, welcome to the Breakaway Talk podcast. We are very excited today to have a special conversation with Regi and Kobie and yours truly. We are going to reflect on the work that God is doing in Germany through sports ministry, through Breakaway partnerships. And this year was quite a special year for us, and we're going to talk about that in this episode. Breakaway's been serving in Germany for 15 years. We've started many camps. We've seen some churches planted. We've seen some churches revitalized. We've been able to help some communities develop their youth outreach through sports camps. But primarily, these camps have been baseball camps. And this year, we saw a new element by adding basketball. And these two fellas were a huge part of bringing that new sport to Heubach, Germany. And we saw just an elevated reach of impact with the camp itself, with the schools that we were serving in, with basketball clinics. So we want to talk about that a little bit and share some of those stories, those testimonies. God allowed us to have some connections with some Ukrainian refugee young people, being able to encourage them and to offer them some hope. And you guys, I'm sure, Kobie and Regi, you guys are going to share some of your personal connections with those in just a few minutes. So for anybody that is a new listener to the Breakaway Talk podcast, you may not know Regi and Kobie. You can go back on our website or on YouTube, Spotify, and you can see some of our first couple of episodes where they share their personal testimonies, just really awesome stories, both of these guys. And I know them both very well, and I know their hearts, and they love Jesus. They love young people. They love serving. So go back if you're new to the podcast and check out their stories. So why don't we go ahead and start? Just kind of give a brief intro about how you guys first got involved with Breakaway, what it is, that you are a part of with our community, for those who may be tuning in for the first time and they're not sure what this thing is all about. Regi, won't you go ahead and start as our elderly statesman? I like to say that me and Regi are the old heads and Kobie is the young buck coming up. But Regi, you've been serving with Breakaway for almost 30 years now. We go way back, mid 90s, late 90s of serving with basketball ministry and juvenile centers, school and youth ministries. So take us back, just give us a little brief intro to your introduction and involvement with Breakaway over the years.
God was in the plan from the beginning, because we never envisioned that it would be here. From there, we was just having fun playing basketball with kids in juvenile facilities, and from that, God, multiplied it, and it is what it is now. I was coming out of a Department of Corrections, and I just wanted to connect with guys and share my stories with guys that was incarcerated, and God used me loving basketball as a tool to reach them. And usually when you play ball and and they like ball and you play pretty good, they'll listen. And that was the main thing. We just wanted to get them to listen because it really wasn't about the basketball. It was about being able to share the love of Jesus to those young people. And so it has evolved from that 30 years ago to where it's at now to actually going abroad. And the message is still the same, just in a different place.
Yeah, I like how you put that because some things are going to be different with uh, nations and different cultural elements, but then young people are still young people. Young people still need hope. Young people still deal with some of the same issues, and no matter where you're at in the world, and all young people need the gospel, right? Some things just never change. Kobie, it's been about 12, 13 years. You first started coming to Breakaway Camp, I believe you were 9 or 10 years old. And even back then at 9 years old, it was a really tough season in your life. Some instability with your childhood. Tell us about your introduction to Breakaway and where it all began.
My parents got incarcerated. Both of my parents got incarcerated, so that really it took a toll. So I guess that's when either my aunt or my grandmother got in touch, or y'all got in touch with my grandmother, and God decided that the best place for me was at Breakaway. Though I've said it many times that I at first did not want to be there. I did not want to go to a Christian summer camp. I didn't want to go to I didn't really want to do anything. But looking back, I know that it was absolutely God's plan for me to experience that in order to give me the ability to go and plant seeds in other places. You know, I didn't take a toll. It didn't take me and put me in a better spot. It gave me the ability to go and help others get to that better spot with Jesus.
Yeah, that's really what discipleship is all about. You break it down, how simple it is. It's coming to know Jesus, growing in a relationship with Jesus, and then learning how to go out and tell others and empower others with the hope of Jesus. That's really discipleship in a nutshell, isn't it? And being conformed more to Christ and his likeness. You know, I'm so proud of you, Kobie, because I've seen this journey over the last 12, 13 years, and to see you go from a young camper to a camp leader to camp staff, and then hopping an ocean, right, on an airplane to go halfway across the world to serve other young people, and to see the way that you do it with such grace and enthusiasm. I want to talk about your very first mission trip, which was last year, and then we're going to swing back to Regi. You went on your first mission trip overseas to Germany last year to Heubach, and it was a baseball camp, and you just jumped in, even though baseball was not your number one sport. You're a phenomenal wrestler, and you really were a standout in high school with wrestling. But you came and you just had a servant heart. You were willing to, coach baseball and spend time with the young people. And because you're an athlete, you just jumped right in and were able to do that well. So tell us about your first experience last year going on a mission trip with Breakaway to Germany and what that was like for you.
I love sport. I love to play any sport, anything physical. I absolutely love to do, and no matter where I am. But it was really the mission that I really wanted to experience. I really wanted in their culture. It was a lot more than the sport. I would say the sport, obviously, it plays a huge part. It brings pretty much two groups of people that have completely different lives and can bring them together, and to show brings them together like into unison, like almost nothing else can. So that was obviously really important. But I just genuinely loved making connections, with a lot of the campers, especially considering that we live two completely different lives. it was just so amazing to see how, though we live on two different continents, that we can still come together in Jesus Christ, and as well as sport.
I love the aspect of cross-cultural missions in the sense that it teaches us how we're different, but it also reveals how much we're alike, and especially how we're all created in God's image, right? And to be able to cross over those boundaries and recognize that we're all made in the same image of God, no matter what part of the planet we're from, or what our ethnicity is, et cetera. There's such a beauty and a power in cross-cultural mission work. And Regi, this year was your first mission trip to Germany. So tell us about that. What was your experience this year, and your takeaway from Germany?
First of all, I don't like traveling. People here were surprised because after playing basketball for the years and traveling a lot, I don't like packing and going through airports. And so personally, I don't like traveling, but God had kept nudging me about, he said on January the 1st, it was not going to just be a new year, it was going to be a do year. And I didn't understand exactly what that meant, but it's been a lot of different things that I've done this year that I had never done before in ministry. And so when that opportunity arose, I knew it was time. And but it exceeded any expectation I could have ever had. People are the same. We were in Germany, and when the Spirit of God dwells in you, it's gonna shine to whoever you come in contact with. And that's what happened there. It's like the Spirit of God was just prevalent.
Kobie, I've told you this. You really planted the seeds last year for adding basketball to the sports camp this year. I remember you were working with a young man there and giving him some tips and coaching him along as he was doing his jump shot and layups and such. And on the way to the airport after the baseball camp last year, me and the pastor were talking, and that's when the basketball discussion came up, and we both were on the same page, and we said next year we should add basketball to this camp. We had the gymnasium, we had the venue, we had all of that. So you were instrumental. God used you last year to plant those seeds and really to birth a vision. And then you were able to come back, and Regi came this year with all of his basketball experience as well. And it was like God orchestrated all of this and put it all together, and it was like icing on the cake, right? So you kind of brought the batter last year, introduced the batter, and then it got all mixed up, and then it was baked, and then the icing was put on it, and you two working together in that context was such joy to my heart, seeing how God used you guys. Tell me about your experience with German culture. Tell me maybe some of the words that you learned that have stuck with you. Maybe you still said when you were coming home, or even some foods that you guys ate that you'll never forget.
My favorite word in German is definitely Schmetterling. I think that very aggressive word for butterfly is amazing, to say the least.
Schmetterling.
Yeah, Schmetterling
is butterfly.
Yeah.
Schmetterling. I love the word for hospital, which is Krankenhaus. And I just knew the first time I heard Krankenhaus, it wasn't a place that I wanted to visit. So it's very appropriate to be a hospital. When we do the sports camps, we tell the Americans when they come over, you don't want to end up at the Krankenhaus, or in the Krankenwagen. Is the ambulance. So let's talk about the interactions with the young people, because we had different venues. We had the camp venue, which was, kind of home base for us. But then we also ran some basketball clinics in the schools and got to work with the students in those contexts. So what about you, Kobie, with interactions with the young people? What was that like, sharing the clinics, but also, gospel interactions with people in different contexts?
Mm-hmm. Right. So I'll start off with when we went to the schools first. That was an amazing experience. I really enjoyed going into the schools. It was good to get a glimpse into, because I've obviously have been in school here in the U.S. since, seems like forever, but I've been in school for a very long time. So it was good to get a glimpse into what it's like for them.
Regi, somebody once said that no matter where you're at in the world and what language you're speaking, when you drop a soccer ball, everyone knows what the mission is. You kick the ball in the goal. And I think the same can be said with basketball, right? Like you go to a new place, your languages might be different, but once you start dribbling that basketball, everybody knows what the goal is. Get it in the net, right? So talk about your experience with that, especially with running the clinics with some of the students.
It's amazing how the analogy from basketball relates to life and even the gospel. You talked about a goal. The ultimate goal when playing basketball is to make the basket. But sometimes you miss and there's a rebound, and that's life. In order to make that goal, sometimes you need an assist. That's life, and that's when you depend on someone else to help you reach that goal. So basketball can be used. The analogy pertain to life and the gospel, and those kids were just like sponges. They got excited because they learned how to make a layup. And so that really excited me because basketball in Germany now is taking off. We know soccer is always going to be number one, but they just won that big Euro League. I'm talking about with all the best pros from all the European countries, and Germany won it. So basketball is growing and taking on a new meaning in Germany.
One of the things that we got to do with those clinics and then also at the camp was we had some connections with some Ukrainian refugee kids that are in Germany. And some of these kids, their fathers are back home fighting in the war right now. And I know there was one girl who's been to the camp multiple times now, and she was at the end of the camp going to meet with her father. She hadn't seen him in many, many months. And over the summer, her mother told me this at the end of the camp. She told me how she was feeling kind of depressed, and it was really a difficult time for her, a difficult season. But when the Americans showed up and sent a message to her that we wanted to see her at camp, she got really excited, and she came and she played the baseball. She thrived and really had an incredible week. And you could see her beaming by the end of the week. And you guys had, I think, some similar experiences on the basketball side with a couple of Ukrainian youth. So tell us about those encounters.
I think we had met one of them in the school. And we actually met two of them. We gave a basketball. Voma gave a basketball to the one kid. I don't think he ever came to the camp. But he had the friend that showed up. And then he brought his friend the next day, and that's the guy who only got to stay one day. I can't really pronounce his name, but I've been in contact with him since he's been back from Ukraine. He got on my Facebook page, and so we've had a chance, but we don't have an idea of what they go through. We live in America where, we complain about stuff that the problems they wish they had. And he took a 30-hour bus ride to Ukraine that next day to see his dad before he went to the war. And through it all, it's just, we don't know what's going on the inside of him. But I know that day that he came and was able to play basketball. And then the one kid, I got pictures of him, videos of him making layups. And I show it to people here. I'm like, this guy, all he wanted to do was learn how to make a layup, and he got it down. And I show that. But, man, they're special, and I would love to see those kids again.
Yeah, sports can be a refuge, can it? I know that growing up in my very troubled and turbulent childhood, a baseball field or, a kickball field, a football field would be a refuge for me. It would be like a safe haven, a place where when I got there, I would forget about all my problems back home, and it just was a safe place for me. And I know, Kobie, you've talked about your childhood instability and moving around from different house to house, and even though we have no idea what these kids are going through and their families in the middle of this war, uh, there's still parts of our past and childhood troubles that equip us, right, to at least be able to have the empathy to know that these young people have so much instability in their lives right now. And if you didn't go through the kind of childhood pain that you went through, you might not have that kind of empathy today, right? Your heart has been broken for the things that breaks God's heart, because of the pain that you've gone through. That it has shaped you, and I'm thankful that you realize that at an early age, that you realize that God could take that pain, that trauma, and redeem it, turn it into something that is a catalyst for good in the world today. Because too often young people don't know what to do with their pain. Their pain, instead of it making them better, like it's done in your life because you've given it to Christ, it makes them bitter. And the more bitter people get through their pain, there's a saying that I'm always reminded of, and it goes like this: hurt people hurt people. Hurt people hurt people. And it's a cycle that keeps going on and on. The man who brought the deepest pain into my childhood was my biological father. And I often stop and think about who hurt him, because he didn't bring hurt into my life just out of nowhere. No man, I think, has a child and says, I want to hurt this child. But because he had been hurt, because he had been scarred and wounded, and never really learned how to deal with his wounds and his pain and reconcile that, give it to God, he never found healing. And therefore he repeated a cycle of hurt. And I'm grateful that you have found God's redemption in your life. Regi, you have too. There's a story that you shared in Germany, and I love this, and I really saw how it got the attention of the young people at camp when you talked about that paralyzed man in the gospel, and he could not get to Jesus. Sometimes hurt people can't get to Jesus. They're paralyzed by the hurt and the pain. They're crippled by it. But that man in the Bible had 4 friends who did whatever they possibly could to get their friend who could not walk to Jesus, and it changed his life.
That's that assist. He was paralyzed, and it was a crowd, and they were listening to Jesus. Everybody wanted to hear Jesus, and so did he, but he was paralyzed. And his friends knew how important it was to get him to Jesus. And they climbed up on the roof with him and his bed, and they lowered themselves down through the roof into where Jesus was speaking, and they got him to Jesus. And that was an assist. That was a real assist. But the goal was the same, to get to Jesus.
Yes.
And the irony of that story is he was carried in on the bed, and he carried that same bed out. And so some of the things that, some of the same things that's been carrying us for so long, when God enters the equation, now we're carrying those things. And that's what stands out to me about that. But it was just those friends knew that if we can just get him to Jesus, and we're not going to just wish or hope, we're going to do whatever it takes to get him there. And sometimes that's what it takes from us, is going that extra mile. We may have to climb up on the roof, but the ultimate goal was to get him to Jesus. And obviously they knew enough about Jesus, or they had enough faith to know that if we could just get him there, he'd be fine. And I think I know enough about Jesus to know that if I could just get him there, he'll take care of the rest.
What would you say to a person who feels like their past might disqualify them from serving God? You come from a story, a testimony of someone who really, you grew up in church, you had all the answers, right? You knew the way, the truth, and the life. And as you shared your story on another podcast episode, people can go back and listen to that. You went through a lot of really self-inflicted pain, right? Because you made personal decisions and personal choices that led to your own demise, found yourself incarcerated, and you also found out that God's a God of second chances, and God gave you an assist to get back up and back on your feet. And I would imagine there's been times when maybe the inner self says, hey, look at your past, look at the shame, look at the things that you did, and the condemnation that comes with that. You're not fit to be a servant of Christ. But Jesus is the one who makes us fit, right? He's the one who calls us and qualifies us and doesn't ask anybody else for their permission if they think we are fit or not, or if we're qualified or not. Jesus is the one who calls it. What would you say a person maybe who is struggling with that, doesn't feel like, fit because their past disqualifies them in some way?
First of all, you made a mistake. You're not a mistake. We're going to get that out of the way. Just because you made a mistake doesn't mean you are a mistake. So we're past that. Remember David? Yeah. That's the one that killed Goliath, the hero. But yeah, he made some mistakes also. This dude made some bad mistakes. But yet, look, we call him a hero. And then show them the heroes of faith in Hebrews, where all of those people made mistakes, but they call them heroes. When you start using your mistake to help somebody, when you can share your mistake with somebody else and you see a light come on in them, it's like, oh man, I thought I was the only one that experienced that. And you experienced it. Yes, I experienced it, but now I get to tell you about it, and I get to show you that you don't have to live in that mess the rest of your life. You can come out of it, and you can be used to help other people come out of it.
Kobie, you talked about going to the University of Tennessee, studying to be a nurse, but something happened. There was a pivot. There was a shift. So there was a moment or a season where you had to pivot. It wasn't going to end up the way that you thought it was going to end up, right? And I think about, when I was young, my ultimate dream, I think Regi can relate with this on the basketball side. My ultimate dream as a young person was to be a professional baseball player. And I think the reason for that was, like I said earlier, every time I got on a baseball field, it was a refuge for me. It was a safe place, an escape from all of my childhood troubles and difficulty in a dysfunctional home and such. And that birthed something in me to feel like if I did this professionally, then everything's going to be in my favor. Everything's going to be happy, right? It's going to end up in a really, really good place. But also there was a lot of self-centeredness, selfishness. I wanted to be the hero in the story. I wanted to hit the 500-foot home runs. I wanted to be known like Eddie Murray and Cal Ripken, and the dream of playing in old Memorial Stadium in Baltimore. That was the childhood dream. But there was a pivot, and after I got into a lot of trouble and came to know Christ, even then I had a dream to be an architect. And as you guys know, God totally shifted those plans altogether. And I ended up, in a different path, working with young people my entire adult life in ministry. And I say all of that because life is about pivots. It's about assists. We get those assists, right? but it's also about pivots. And in basketball, you also have a pivot foot, right? And we have to be able to pivot. And I love Kobie's favorite scripture, which is Proverbs. I believe it's Proverbs
3, 5, and 6.
3, 5, and 6, where it says, trust in the Lord with all of your heart, lean not upon your own understanding. In all of your ways, acknowledge God, and he will direct your paths. And I found that to be true in my life, even though I didn't end up playing professional baseball. I look at my life. I remember when my son, Zach, was playing Little League Baseball, and his very first Little League team was the Orioles. And I sat there in the stands as a father with my Orioles cap on, my Orioles shirt on. And I remember thinking, I grew up to be an Oriole. I grew up to be an Oriole, but I grew up to be the best kind of Oriole instead of just one that hits 500 home runs or 500 feet home runs. I grew up to be an Oriole who is my son's biggest cheerleader on the side as he's playing Little League, you know. The dream, the pivot became something that God had a much bigger picture for. And then, you know, I had the opportunity to use baseball in ministry to serve young people and empower kids, not just with sports skills and life skills, but ultimately the hope of who Christ is and his biggest dreams for them in their lives. And that's been now a dream that I never knew I had, that God's ways were so much higher than mine. His thoughts were so much bigger than mine. I could not be in a more happy place. And there's a scripture that says, the lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. And when I read that, I can't help but to pause and look at my life and say, this is true. The lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. It wasn't the dream that I imagined. It wasn't the path that I would have chosen, but God chose it for me. And there's no better place than to be on the path that God has chosen for us, because that is where the ultimate joy, the ultimate fulfillment, and really, you know, where the real meaning of life exists is in that place.
You said you wanted to be an architect, but you are. Except you're not designing and building houses, you're building lives. And when you said that word, I wanted to be an architect. You just don't know how much an architect you are. You're just not designing and building houses. You're designing and building lives. And you know, Jimmy, we're getting ready to we're putting together a youth revival. God put it on my heart, and I started getting some contacts, and it's going to be a countywide youth revival at my church. And it's a big church. It used to be a movie theater, so it's going to be nice. But I don't know if you remember, we brought the kids up from West Palm Beach in the Youth for Christ band, and we had that youth revival. You spoke. And those kids was laid out all over that church.
I did.
There's a young man who was there. His name is George. And it's kind of hard to forget George. But they're in their 40s now, but actually he just got ordained and installed as a pastor. And he's going to come and speak at our youth revival. And he was one of those kids that was laid out on the floor in that little church that night that you spoke.
Amen.
Yeah.
So final thoughts on the pivot. God's ways being higher than ours. His dreams being much more bigger than anything we could have imagined. Any final thoughts on that pivot and trusting him, right? Trusting him that his plans are better. And even when things don't go our way, instead of just sinking into disappointment, trusting that his path is a better path for us. Any final thoughts on that?
It says that his plans were to prosper you and to not harm you and to give you hope in the future.
The more you get used to the pivot, you are more able to accept the next one. You realize that I planned it this way, but it didn't go this way. And when God's plan worked out, it was much better. So when that next pivot comes, you're more apt to say, okay, God, I realized that I wanted it like this, but your way is always better. So it's easier to accept that next pivot when you've lived through it and realize that God's plans was better for me than mine ever could have been. So it gets easier the more you learn to accept it.
Yeah. I like to say that the 10th fruit of the Spirit is flexibility. And you're not going to be able to pivot very well without flexibility, right? We have to be able to be resilient, flexible, and where God leads, where God calls, trust that he knows better than us why he's calling us into that. And then we have to be willing to put our yes on the table and keep it there, not take it off. Kobie, 30 years difference between you and me, 40 years difference between you and Regi. And here we are. God's got us in his family, serving his mission, carrying the torch. You know, we stand on the shoulders of those who have gone before us. And hopefully, we are doing something to prop up the ones coming up behind us so that they can stand on our shoulders and be able to take that mission even further into the future. God knows our world needs it, needs the hope of Christ, and needs ambassadors of good news.